Yes. Yes. Following President Trump's sweeping executive orders in January, which called for the removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, there may be an unintended backlash to this policy that virtually nobody was expecting. While many of the president's feelings towards DEI pointed towards race when it came to college admissions, higher education, and admissions, experts have suggested that the ban on DEI is likely to affect another underrepresented group of college applicants. Men. Yes, men. Particularly white men.
No, you're lying. You're lying. What makes you lie?
No, Ned, I'm not lying. I swear. White men were benefiting from DEI. Yes, a lot more than people knew. So, in the rage about DEI and affirmative action, the perception is that DEI and affirmative action were implemented because black people, according to Charlie Kirk and people like him, can't compete on a level playing ground because we are inferior culturally and mentally, basically. And so these nice, good-hearted, bleeding heart liberals installed DEI and affirmative action so that we, who cannot compete on a level playing field with anybody else, with whites and Asians, needed this DEI or affirmative action. Now, obviously, over the years, the story has been a little bit different than what the actual facts on the ground are. 96% of DEI positions were non-black people. 96% of the DEI positions. Okay? White women were the #1 beneficiaries of affirmative action. And of the minorities and black people who were actually benefiting from affirmative action, a lot of them were immigrants. They were not legacy black Americans or Native Americans, which is really what affirmative action was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be about mitigating the effects of hundreds of years of racism against two particular groups of people, which is legacy black Americans who built the country through slave labor and were exploited and marginalized throughout Jim Crow, the black codes, redlining, mass incarceration in the two-tiered legal system, all those things, and Native Americans who had just been, genocided and had their land stolen. Affirmative action was sold as a way to try to mitigate the damage that had been done to our communities and try to sort of give us a leg up after years of having generational wealth and, hell, our lives stolen from us in many cases. But that was never really what the reality of this program was. The reality of the program was that it was always benefiting white people, particularly white women. And now we see that even white men were benefiting from these DEI policies. I want to give a big shout out to the Griot for this story. They do some good journalism sometimes. At Brown University, according to numbers cited by the Washington Post, the incoming first-year class consisted of 7% men compared to 4.4% women. Schools have attempted to keep incoming classes evenly balanced between genders despite a growing number of men opting out of attending college. According to data, 40% more women than men enroll in higher education, which means that men have a much easier chance of being admitted. So because most men in younger generations are not going to college, are skipping college in general, and higher education is full of women, men, even white men, have been considered a minority. And these universities have tried their best to try to balance the sexes in their college campuses, which I can understand. So since white men are a minority on these campuses, they have actually used DEI policies to try to get more white men on campus. But now, since Donald Trump got rid of DEI policies, now there's just going to be a lot more women on campus. Other entities have followed Trump's policy, including corporations like AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. However, elite institutions have so far been slow to comply with the Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education to receive prioritization in federal funding. The policy requests that schools and universities implement and adapt policy changes, including ending affirmative action, freezing tuition, and capping international enrollment at 15%, amongst other measures. So they were so sure that they were going to be hurting us, hurting black people, particularly legacy black Americans, and really minorities in general, and even maybe some women, that they didn't even realize that in some of these spaces, especially on college campuses where white men are minorities, that they were actually benefiting, they were actually admitting a higher percentage of white men than white women because there just weren't enough white men. Now, the Trump administration has made it a priority to include gender amongst the items it says schools should not review for admissions or hiring purposes. They also do not want race, ethnicity, nationality, one's political views, sexual orientation, gender identity, or religious views to be considered. And let me just say this. They have a point on some of this stuff. As I said at the beginning, the whole point of affirmative action and DEI was supposed to be about mitigating the damage done to legacy black Americans. Not all black people, but legacy black Americans, particularly the ones that America broke with slavery, Jim Crow, the black codes, and years of institutional racism. And of course, Native Indigenous people. Just like everything else, when it comes to the civil rights movement and different rights movement, white liberals colonized the civil rights movement, hijacked it, put their own agendas in it, and now we have to deal with white women, gays, transgenders, immigrants, and all these other groups of people who were never slaves in this country, who weren't genocided to make the land of the United States, being a lot of the main ones who benefited from all of these rights struggles that legacy black Americans, in particular, fought for in the streets. And so on some level, these institutions did go diversity crazy. They did go crazy in the sense of making it seem as if the issue with racism was that there wasn't enough diversity, as opposed to being about mitigating harms done to specific people. And this is one of those things where a lot of people in the reparations movement sort of figured out about that ruling that got rid of affirmative action, was that the way it was worded by Clarence Thomas was that if you could prove specific harms done by America, there might be an opening for a form of affirmative action for people who've had specific harms done to them, which is what it was supposed to be in the first place. It was never just supposed to be about anybody and everybody. It was supposed to be about legacy black Americans and indigenous people, the groups of people who were specifically victimized, brutalized, institutionalized, marginalized to create the United States of America. But instead, now we have to deal with, white women, gays, transgenders, illegal immigrants, and all these other groups of people who basically cut to the front of the bus, cut ahead of us. And now us, the very people who marched and protested and fought for all of this, are second-class citizens in our own civil rights movement. And this has been in a lot of instances, not just with affirmative action. And so a lot of what made affirmative action and DEI policies so weak was that these policies had been misused and abused because they weren't even primarily being used for the people they were intended for in the first place. I will always believe in affirmative action for legacy Black Americans, for indigenous people. Again, America was literally built on our backs. And we were excluded from all the institutions of wealth and policy. Wealth and power. Now, where I disagree with people on the right specifically about is their pretense that it's either affirmative action and DEI or it's meritocracy. There is nothing meritocratic about America's college system or any American system. 80% of the people who get jobs in America get their jobs through personal relationships. There have been studies done on this. CNBC reported on this not too long ago. A huge plurality of the white people at places like Harvard are legacy students. They get in because their parents were either students or because their parents paid a certain amount of money, gave a certain amount of money to the university, or because they found a way to get some sort of athletic scholarship, which we now know, thanks to the Varsity Blues scandal, is nonsense often. A lot of people getting athletic scholarships, shouldn't even be, in these colleges, at least aren't even real athletes, should I say. So it's not really affirmative action and DEI or meritocracy. It's affirmative action and DEI or nepotism and cronyism. They're always going to make sure that their kids can get into any institution that they want, even if whether they deserve it or not. That's how somebody like George W. Bush could get into Yale as a C student. C student. As Chris Rock said, George Bush as a C student got into Yale. A Black C student can't get a job at Burger King. And so don't let the right gaslight you on this. The fallout from Trump's policies regarding DEI has been felt across the country. A University of Virginia president resigned earlier due to pressure from the administration, and some of the president's once ardent supporters have criticized him on the matter. In April, Candace Owens found herself rooting for Harvard University over Trump, feeling that the administration had overstepped its bounds with its attacks on DEI. She said, and I quote, "I never thought I'd see a day where I'd be rooting for a university above Donald J. Trump and his administration, but I don't recognize this administration right now. I don't recognize what's happening. I have a theory, I do." She added, "Going after college universities, trying to suppress free speech while you're telling us that you're not suppressing speech while pretending you're fighting DEI. It's so messy, it's so obvious, everyone knows what you're doing." Now, I will say this, about this one particular issue, Candace Owens is right. Candace Owens, of course, the Black female conservative firebrand, who's one of the biggest podcasters and biggest, political commentators in the world currently. But what seems to be obvious to me as well is that she is switching her grift. Much of her grift for many years has been about kicking legacy Black Americans, telling us that we have a bad culture, that, we are, lawless and have all these issues. and that slavery doesn't exist. Racism doesn't exist. And it's all basically, just the typical right-wing black conservative shtick. Just because she was a black woman, the right could couch their racist views and even sexist views in this black woman. Now, she is an ardent anti-Israel critic, and she sees how she's been treated by much of the right wing, including losing her job, her platform at the Daily Wire, where, again, she was hired for years by Ben Shapiro and other white Jewish people to disparage the black community. Now, they've kicked her to the curb because she actually tried to essentially get some independence and call out Israel for the horrific things they're doing in Gaza. And so now she's switching her grift. Now she's trying to come back to the black community. She's trying to come back. And some people are actually buying it. I am not. I will never forget the horrible thing she said about George Floyd. George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose. That has been debunked many times. That is not what the coroner's report says in Minneapolis. But again, she did that to prove her conservative bona fides to her white corporate masters. And now, that she's gotten some independence, they've shown her who she is and what they really think about her. People like Nick Fuentes and other white conservatives have basically told her to shut the hell up. That's what Ben Shapiro basically told her. How dare you? We platformed you to disparage black people, not Jews. You can say whatever you want to about black people, but good Lord. But back to this issue of DEI and affirmative action, it is important to realize that being wealthy and white has always been the biggest form of affirmative action, and no black person, particularly no legacy black American, I can't answer for you immigrants or people who are not legacy black Americans, but no black person, legacy black American, or native indigenous person should ever be ashamed to get a affirmative action or DEI position. If it's not you, it will go to another Kennedy, another Bush, another Trump, another Clinton, another Vanderbilt, another Rockefeller, one of the Koch brothers' kids, one of the Waltons' kids, one of Disney's kids, one of Larry Ellison's kids or grandkids at this point. That is how most people get their wealth. There's been studies done on how a huge percentage of the sons of Wall Street CEOs work at their father's companies. But they don't feel guilty about that. But they want you to feel guilty about having an entire system rigged against you and taking advantage of one program that might be, at least should be used to mitigate the damage done against you and your community. I say don't go for that. Get your money, get your education, do what you got to do. If Donald Trump's not ashamed to be a Nepo baby, if Mitt Romney is not ashamed of being a Nepo baby, if George W. Bush and John Kerry and all these Kennedys are not ashamed of being Nepo babies, you shouldn't be ashamed to benefit from affirmative action or DEI. And all those white men who ain't gonna get into university now because they're doing away with the DEI gender balancing programs, you're welcome. You're welcome. You were so busy trying to get me, you messed around and screwed yourself. All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to get into the new star of the Democratic Party, one Miss Jasmine Crockett. Is she everything she seems to be? We'll find out. Please stay with us here on WLTH 1370 AM. That's 92.7 in the FM dial, the Region's Choice, the People's Voice. The number is 219-885-1371. The number, again, 219-885-1371. We'll be right back after these.